Hey guys, tonight we're taking a rather solitary and windswept voyage to the rugged, untamed coastline of 19th century Australia, to a place of stark beauty, immense isolation, and the constant, unwavering vigil of a lonely lighthouse keeper. Imagine yourself perched high in a stone tower, buffeted by relentless ocean winds, your only companions the screeching seabirds, the crashing waves, and the great blinking eye of the lamp. You meticulously tend a solitary beacon against the vast, dark indifference of the Southern Ocean. You'll be stepping into the heavy oilskin clad boots of a soul whose days and nights are dictated by the turning of the light, the roar of the sea, and a silence so profound it can almost feel like a physical presence. Now, a little reality check for you. Your chances of surviving this particular historical immersion without developing a deep and abiding appreciation for reliable Wi Fi, the company of other human beings, or perhaps just a really, really good non leaky roof are, shall we say, remarkably slim. The crushing loneliness, the violent storms, the sheer grinding monotony, it wasn't exactly a career path for the faint of heart or the overly sociable. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning me in from and what time it is for you. So please drop that in the comments below. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You awaken not to the crowing of a rooster or the clatter of a milk cart, but to the eternal thunderous roar of the Southern Ocean as it hurls itself against the granite cliffs at the base of your isolated stone tower. It's a sound that has become the very fabric of your existence, a constant, sometimes menacing, sometimes oddly comforting bass note to the symphony of your solitude. The pre dawn air in your small Spartan sleeping chamber, tucked away somewhere in the lower levels of the lighthouse, or perhaps in a tiny adjoining keeper's cottage built to withstand the gales, is cold and damp, carrying the sharp, briny tang of salt spray and the faint, oily scent of the great lamp that still burns far above you. Your bones ache with a familiar dull weariness, the residue of another long night spent listening, watching and keeping the vital flame alive. Through the small, thick paned window, you see the first almost imperceptible dilution of the night's deep indigo. It is that strange liminal hour when darkness has not yet fully surrendered, but the promise of dawn is a palpable presence on the eastern horizon, a pale ethereal glow against the retreating stars. You know without needing to consult the ticking marine chronometer in its gimbaled case, one of the few pieces of precise, sophisticated equipment in this otherwise rudimentary outpost, that your watch is nearing its end, and with it, the lamp's nightly dominion. You push aside the heavy, coarse woolen blanket, its fibers still holding the faint, musty scent of countless damp nights, and rise stiffly from your narrow bunk. Your alarm clock in this remote corner of the world is simply the inexorable turning of the earth, and the sun, which is usually a fairly reliable, if sometimes rather aggressively cheerful, celestial timekeeper. The precise psychological toll of such extreme, prolonged isolation, coupled with the immense responsibility of maintaining a life saving beacon, and the often monotonous, highly regimented daily routine on these 19th century lighthouse keepers, beyond the somewhat romanticized or occasionally sensationalized anecdotal accounts of developing profound eccentricities, succumbing to fits of melancholy, or demonstrating an almost superhuman stoic endurance, is an area that maritime historians and historical psychologists continue to explore, piecing together fragmented evidence from official logbooks, surviving personal letters, and governmental reports on lighthouse services. You, however, are not currently engaged in a psychological study. You are simply very tired, very cold, and very much looking forward to the brief, inadequate period of rest that will follow the extinguishing of the lamp. You pull on your thick woolen trousers and a heavy knitted Guernsey frock garments, chosen not for their elegance but for their sheer, unyielding practicality against the persistent chill and the damp, salt laden air. Then you begin your ascent up the narrow, winding stone staircase that spirals within the thick walls of the tower, each step worn smooth and slightly concave by the passage of your own solitary feet and those of the keepers who came before you, if indeed there were any at this particularly remote and recently established station. The only sounds are the rhythmic thud of your sea boots on the stone, the distant, ever present roar of the ocean, and the mournful, hollow whistle of the wind as it seeks out every crack and cranny in the tower's sturdy but not entirely impervious defenses. As you climb higher, the air grows colder, and you can begin to feel the slight, almost imperceptible vibration of the tower itself as it resists the constant pressure of the wind. Finally, you reach the small iron door that leads into the lantern room, the very heart of your domain. You pause for a moment, then push it open. The change in atmosphere is immediate. Here, high above the raging sea, the air is warmer, filled with the surprisingly potent heat generated by the massive lamp itself, and thick with the pungent, slightly sweet, slightly acrid smell of burning kerosene or whale oil, depending on the era and the specific fueling system of your particular light. And then there is the light itself, a brilliant, almost painfully intense white or yellowish beam, magnified and focused by the intricate, multifaceted Fresnel lens that surrounds it, rotating with a slow, hypnotic, and utterly dependable rhythm, sweeping its life-saving message far out into the darkness of the Tasman Sea or the vast Indian Ocean. The lamp isn't just a light. It's your very bright, very demanding, and slightly oily, perpetually needy roommate. You step inside. The lantern room is a circular chamber, its walls almost entirely composed of thick, curved glass panes, designed to withstand the fiercest gales and the impact of particularly suicidal seabirds. Through these panes, you can see the world slowly, reluctantly emerging from the night. The eastern horizon is now a band of pale, oyster shell gray, tinged with the faintest blush of primrose. The sea below is a vast, restless expanse of dark, churning water, its surface flecked with whitecaps. Even in this relatively calm pre-dawn, the rugged, uninhabited coastline of this new raw continent stretches away to the north and south, a wild, unforgiving panorama of sheer cliffs, hidden reefs, and dense, impenetrable coastal scrub. Perhaps you know the local Aboriginal name for this particular windswept headland, a name that whispers of ancient spirits, of dreamtime stories, of a connection to this land that stretches back far beyond the arrival of your stone tower and its European light. A name gleaned from a faded surveyor's map or from a rare fleeting encounter with the shy original inhabitants of this coast, now mostly pushed further inland by the relentless, if slow, colonial expansion that your lighthouse, in its own small way, serves to facilitate by making these treacherous waters safer for the ships that bring settlers and supplies. It is time. The dawn is breaking. The lamp's work for this night is done. With a practiced, methodical sequence of movements, you begin the process of extinguishing the great light. You might first reduce the flow of fuel, turning a small brass valve, causing the intensity of the flame within the multiple wicks or the incandescent mantle, if it's a more modern apparatus, to slowly diminish. Then, with a special snuffer, a long-handled brass cone, or by carefully lowering the wicks themselves, you extinguish each flame one by one. The brilliant sweeping beam that has dominated the night falters, shrinks, and then, with a final soft sigh from the cooling mechanism, it is gone. The sudden absence of its intense light and the cessation of any rhythmic mechanical hum or click from its rotational machinery leaves an almost palpable void in the lantern room. A silence that is now filled only by the roar of the wind and the sea and the rapidly brightening gray light of the new day. The last gleam of the lamp fades from the intricate glass prisms of the lens, and you stand for a moment in the cool, clear light of morning, your nightly vigil complete, ready to face the first meticulous task of your solitary day. The lantern room, now filled with the cool gray and decidedly unmagical light of a coastal Australian dawn, feels strangely empty without the lamp's blazing heart and rhythmic sweep. The immense, intricate Fresnel lens, that marvel of 19th-century optical engineering, which only moments ago was a radiant, life-giving star, now stands cold and dormant, its many concentric rings of prisms and bullseyes holding only the faint, pearly reflections of the overcast sky. Its work for the night is done. Yours for the morning is just beginning. For this giant eye, as some keepers affectionately or perhaps apprehensively call it, demands a daily meticulous and utterly uncompromising ritual of cleaning and polishing. Its ability to gather and project the lamp's light over many dark and stormy leagues of ocean depends entirely on the absolute speck-free purity of its myriad glass surfaces. You retrieve your cleaning supplies from a small dedicated wooden box kept within the lantern room itself. There are soft, well-laundered linen cloths, perhaps a square of supple chamois leather for the final polish, a small brush with soft bristles for dusting the intricate brasswork and the delicate joins between the prisms, and a pot of special cleaning paste or powder. The exact composition of these specialized polishes and gentle cleaning agents, prescribed by the Lighthouse service or perhaps improvised by resourceful keepers, using locally available materials for maintaining the delicate optical surfaces of their valuable Fresnel lenses and the potential long-term chemical effects of these varied substances on the stability and pristine clarity of the historic French or British glass, are areas where official lighthouse manuals of the period provide some general guidelines, but precise local formulations and specific keeper practices often varied considerably and are still occasionally investigated by conservation scientists and maritime historians with a keen interest in such minutiae. Yours might be a simple mixture of whiting and water, or perhaps a touch of spirits of wine for particularly stubborn, greasy marks left by the lamp's fumes. You begin with the dusting, Carefully, methodically, you work your way around the enormous lens, which might stand taller than you, a veritable beehive of precisely angled glass. With your soft brush, you dislodge any particles of soot from the now extinguished lamp mechanism below, any fine sea salt that might have infiltrated the lantern room during the night's gales, any stray cobwebs spun by an overly ambitious lighthouse spider. This isn't just cleaning, it's optical engineering meets extreme high stakes housekeeping with a persistent underlying fear of please don't accidentally scratch or, heaven forbid, drop the very expensive, entirely irreplaceable giant glass thing that everyone's lives depend upon. Then you take one of your soft linen cloths, perhaps dampened ever so slightly with fresh water, a precious commodity here, or your mild cleaning solution, and begin the delicate task of wiping down each individual prism, each curved segment of the great lens. You work from top to bottom section by section, your movements slow, careful, and precise. Each piece of glass hand ground and polished to an incredible accuracy by skilled artisans far away in Europe must be treated with the utmost respect. A smudge, a greasy fingerprint, a speck of dust left behind can significantly diminish the power and clarity of the light, potentially reducing its visible range by miles. A reduction that could mean the difference between safety and disaster for a ship navigating these treacherous, unfamiliar waters. You might have a particular, almost ritualistic sequence. You follow a specific order for cleaning each tier of prisms, a pattern learned from a grizzled older keeper during your training, or one you've developed yourself over countless solitary mornings spent in this glass-walled cage. Perhaps there's even a superstition about always polishing the central bullseye panel last for good luck, or never ever letting your own breath fog a freshly polished segment before moving on. As you clean, the glass begins to sparkle, to come alive again, even in the dull morning light. It catches and refracts the daylight in 1,000 tiny glittering rainbows, transforming your utilitarian cleaning task into a brief, almost magical light show. You are in essence giving this giant multifaceted glass eye its daily beauty treatment. It's a demanding and rather high-maintenance client, to be sure, but the view from its office is on clearer days quite spectacular. Once the immense glass lens is gleaming to your satisfaction, its every facet spotless and brilliant, you turn your attention to the lamp mechanism itself and the surrounding brasswork. The brass lantern housing the fuel pipes, the clockwork mechanism. If your lighthouse possesses such a marvel for rotating the lens, rather than relying on a simpler weight-driven system, or even in very old lights, manual rotation, all must be kept free of tarnish and grime. You apply a dab of brass polish, perhaps a gritty reddish powder mixed with oil, or a more refined proprietary paste if the lighthouse service is feeling generous with its supplies, and begin to rub. This is more vigorous work, requiring a bit more elbow grease, as they say in lands, where elbows and grease are more commonly discussed. The soft rubbing sound of cloth on metal is a quiet, rhythmic accompaniment to the ever-present sigh of the wind outside the thick glass panes. Your daily upper body workout polishing brass until you can clearly see your own tired, slightly bewildered reflection, judging your life choices and wondering if it's too late to retrain as a shepherd, a career which, while also solitary, at least involves fewer near vertical staircases and less risk of catastrophic maritime disaster due to a poorly polished doorknob equivalent. Slowly, the dull, salt tarnished brass begins to glow with a warm, golden luster. The lamp, even unlit, regains a certain dignity, a sense of its profound importance. You meticulously polish every knob, every lever, every decorative flourish, until the entire apparatus gleams like a piece of temple treasure. It is a matter of pride, this gleaming brass, a testament to your diligence, your dedication to your solitary, vital craft. The task is repetitive, yes, and in some ways profoundly monotonous. But there is also a certain quiet satisfaction in it, a sense of order being restored, of vital machinery being kept in perfect readiness. This lamp is your charge, your responsibility, your silent, powerful colleague in the nightly battle against darkness and the hungry sea. Tending to it with such meticulous care is not just a duty, it's a kind of communion. You might even find yourself humming a tuneless, forgotten sea shanty under your breath as you work, or perhaps even engaging in a one sided conversation with the lens itself, your glassy companion, discussing the previous night's weather or the distinct lack of interesting shipping news. Finally, after what might be an hour or more of this careful, focused labor, the task is complete. The great Fresnel lens sparkles with an almost preternatural clarity, its prisms throwing back the gray morning light in a dazzling display. The brasswork gleams with a warm, reassuring glow. The heart of the lighthouse is clean polished and ready once more to receive the flame that will guide mariners safely through the coming night. You stand back for a moment, surveying your handiwork, a small, tired smile of satisfaction perhaps touching your lips. This first, most critical chore of your day is done. And the effort, the concentration, the meticulous attention to detail has made you acutely aware of a growing hollow emptiness in your own internal workings, an emptiness that clearly signals it is time for breakfast. The lantern room gleams with a cold, dutiful brilliance, its great glass eye now resting pristine and ready for the coming night. The scent of metal polish and lamp oil still hangs faintly in the air, a testament to your morning's meticulous labor. You take one last satisfied look around this high glass-walled chamber, then turn and begin the descent down those same winding stone stairs, which now in the fuller gray light of morning seem slightly less oppressive, though no less treacherous. The journey downwards is quicker, your steps a little lighter, without the immediate weight of the night's vigilance, but your body still carries the deep ache of weariness and the gnawing emptiness in your stomach that the early hour and your recent exertions have only amplified. You reach your small Spartan living quarters, perhaps a single circular room at the base of the tower itself, or a tiny stone-built cottage, clinging precariously to the cliffside nearby, connected to the lighthouse by a windswept covered walkway. The space is functional, to say the least. A narrow bunk built into an alcove, a small rough-hewn wooden table, a single sturdy chair, a few shelves holding your meager provisions, and perhaps a handful of well-worn books, and a small iron stove or open hearth, where a low fire might be struggling to maintain its existence against the persistent damp chill that always seems to permeate these stone walls no matter the season. The roar of the sea and the howl of the wind are still your constant, inescapable companions. their voices seeping through every crack and crevice, a perpetual booming chorus. It is time for breakfast, though the term feast would be a wild and entirely unwarranted exaggeration for what is about to occur. Your larder, stocked by the infrequent and often weather-delayed visits of the government supply ship, offers a limited and unvarying selection. The typical daily diet of 19th-century Australian lighthouse keepers, particularly those stationed at these more remote and infrequently supplied colonial outposts, like your own lonely sentinel on this god-forsaken stretch of coast, and its overall nutritional adequacy or potential deficiencies, scurvy was not an unknown affliction, is often reconstructed by maritime historians and archaeologists from painstaking analysis of official government provisioning lists, which detailed allotted quantities of flour, salt beef, pork, sugar tea, and oatmeal, surviving keepers' personal logs or journals, when such precious documents exist, and any archaeological finds recovered from now abandoned lighthouse sites, including rusted food tins, broken crockery, and sadly sometimes animal bones indicating a desperate attempt at supplementing the monotonous rations. Today, as on most days, breakfast will be porridge. You retrieve a small battered tin or a canvas sack of coarse oatmeal, its contents smelling faintly of dust and distant Scottish highlands. You measure a portion into a small soot-blackened iron pot, add a scoop of water from the wooden cask in the corner. Water that itself tastes faintly of brine and old wood, and perhaps a tiny, carefully measured pinch of your precious, dwindling supply of salt to make it marginally more palatable, or perhaps just to remind yourself of your professional affiliation. You set the pot on the small stove or hang it over the meager fire, stirring it occasionally with a wooden spoon as it slowly, reluctantly begins to thicken into a gray, glutinous mass. The aroma that fills your small room is not unpleasant exactly, a warm, slightly sweet, earthy smell. But it is so profoundly, overwhelmingly familiar, so unvaryingly a part of your daily existence, that it inspires neither joy nor anticipation, merely a kind of weary, resigned acceptance. This porridge isn't just food. It's a culinary exploration of the color gray, a daily meditation on the virtues of uncomplaining endurance. While the porridge bubbles and splutters with a singular lack of enthusiasm, you might brew yourself a cup of tea if your current supplies allow for such a luxury. Tea, that comforting elixir of the British Empire, is a precious commodity, here doled out carefully, each spoonful a small treasure. You watch the dark leaves unfurl in the hot water, releasing their fragrant steam, the amber liquid a small, warm comfort in a generally cold and comfortless world. If tea is scarce, then it is simply more water, perhaps boiled, perhaps not. Finally, the porridge is deemed ready, or at least as ready as it's ever going to be. You pour the thick, steaming, grayish concoction into a simple tin bowl, one that is perhaps dented from a previous encounter with a storm-flung piece of debris, or from being dropped during a moment of profound, sleep-deprived clumsiness. You carry your bowl and your cup of tea or water to the small rough table, its surface scarred with the marks of countless solitary meals, and sit down on your hard wooden chair. Your breakfast companion today, as on every other day, is the existential dread of another 12 hours of unrelenting solitude, occasionally punctuated by the high-pitched, judgmental shriek of a passing seagull. Or perhaps, if you're lucky, That one particularly bold one-legged seagull you've half-named Pegleg Pete might actually land on your window ledge and stare at you with an unnerving, unblinking intensity, silently demanding its share of your meager fare. You usually ignore him. Sharing is not a luxury afforded by the Lighthouse Service Provisioning Manual. You begin to eat spooning the hot, bland porridge into your mouth. It is filling, certainly. It provides a certain stolid, unexciting sustenance. But it is not a joy. It is fuel pure and simple, designed to keep the human machine, your own personal lighthouse tending apparatus, functioning for another day. The only sound apart from the eternal roar of the sea and the whistle of the wind in the chimney, if you have one, is the scrape of your spoon against the tin bowl and the soft rhythmic sound of your own solitary chewing and swallowing. You might have a specific ritual for this solitary breakfast, a way of arranging your bowl and cup, perhaps always ensuring you face the small, salt-caked window that looks out onto the churning gray ocean, as if by staring intently enough at your adversary, you can somehow understand or appease it. Sometimes, to vary the unyielding monotony, you might add a tiny spoonful of dark, sticky molasses or coarse brown sugar to your porridge, if such a treat is available from your stores, transforming its blandness into a merely very, very sweet blandness. Or perhaps you have a piece of hardtack, a ship's biscuit so dense and unyielding it could probably be used to patiently chisel your way out of a stone prison, which you might break into small pieces and soften in your tea, creating a sort of dubious, soggy rusk. The culinary highlights of your week are few and far between, and generally involve discovering that a particular biscuit is only slightly stale rather than actively fossilized. As you eat, your gaze might drift around your small enclosed world. The stone walls are bare, save perhaps for a fading water-stained nautical chart tacked up with a rusty nail, or a crudely carved wooden bird you made during a particularly long and uneventful spell of weather last winter. There are no photographs of loved ones, no cheerful trinkets, no unnecessary adornments. This is a place of work, of duty, of stark, unyielding functionality. Your only true decoration is the ever-present fine layer of salt that seems to crystallize on every surface, a constant reminder of the sea's pervasive, intrusive presence. Breakfast is over all too soon. The tin bowl is scraped clean, the last dregs of tea or water consumed. The meager comfort it provided, the brief illusion of warmth and replenishment, is already beginning to fade. The day, with its litany of other routine chores and its vast, empty stretches of solitary time, looms before you. You rise from the table, rinse your bowl and cup in the small basin with a little of your precious fresh water, and prepare to face the elements once more. The great stone tower, your silent stoic companion, awaits its daily inspection, a check for any new signs of wear and tear, any fresh wounds inflicted by the relentless wind and the corrosive salt-laden spray of the ever-angry sea. You don your oilskins, a stiff, crackling, and vaguely fish-scented second skin that offers at least a theoretical barrier against the wind and the persistent atomized salt spray that defines the atmosphere of this exposed headland. The simple breakfast of salty porridge and weak tea, though meager, has at least taken the sharpest edge off your hunger, and the meticulous cleaning of the great lamp and its intricate lens has instilled a sense of dutiful accomplishment, a small victory against the encroaching chaos of the elements. Now, however, another vital, if less gleaming task awaits the daily inspection of the tower itself, your tall stone companion, your solitary, steadfast fortress against the relentless siege of the Southern Ocean. It is time to check its weathered bones for any new wounds, any fresh vulnerabilities inflicted by the night's gales, or the slow, corrosive artistry of the sea. You step out from the relative shelter of the tower's base door, or from your small adjoining cottage, and are immediately embraced or rather buffeted by the full force of the wind. It howls around the tower's cylindrical or perhaps octagonal form with a sound like 1,000 mournful spirits snatching at your sou'wester hat, pressing cold, damp fingers against your face. The air is thick with salt spray, a fine, stinging mist that coats your lips and leaves a gritty residue on your skin. The sky above is a vast, turbulent canvas of racing gray clouds, occasionally revealing a patch of pale, watery blue, only to be swallowed again by the next approaching squall. This is not a gentle seaside promenade. This is a daily constitutional in what feels like the antechamber to a perpetual storm. You are, in essence, the tower's personal physician about to give it its morning checkup for any new aches, pains, structural complaints, or early signs of existential despair induced by its rather exposed and socially isolated lifestyle. You begin your slow, deliberate circuit around the base of the lighthouse. The ground here is uneven, a mixture of rugged, exposed bedrock, coarse, salt-stunted grasses, and patches of loose scree that have been dislodged from the cliffs above by wind and rain. You tread carefully your heavy sea boots, finding purchase on the slippery, kelp-strewn rocks. The massive stone blocks of the tower's foundation rise sheer and implacable beside you, their surfaces dark with dampness, streaked with white efflorescence from the relentless salt, and patterned with tenacious patches of gray-green and black lichen, those hardy pioneers of the harshest environments. Many of these iconic 19th-century Australian lighthouses were extraordinary feats of engineering, for their time often constructed from locally quarried granite or sandstone by skilled teams of masons and laborers, frequently in incredibly challenging, exposed, and almost inaccessible remote coastal locations. They were built to endure to withstand the very worst that nature could hurl at them, but even the strongest stone eventually yields to the patient, relentless erosion of wind and water. Your eyes, keen and practiced, scan every inch of the stonework within reach. You look for new cracks, however fine that might indicate a shifting of the massive blocks or a failure in the mortar. You search for any stones that appear loose, any pointing that has been scoured out by the abrasive, wind-driven spray. You pay particular attention to the areas around the base where the full fury of storm waves during high tides or particularly violent tempests can crash with a force that makes the entire tower shudder. The long-term structural integrity and overall resilience of these iconic 19th century coastal lighthouses, built with the then contemporary civil engineering techniques and locally sourced, often hand-dressed materials, and situated in these incredibly exposed and perennially hostile marine environments that are subject to constant wave action. Saline corrosion and extreme wind loading is a remarkable testament to their original builders, but also remains a significant and ongoing subject of architectural conservation study, structural analysis, and detailed heritage assessment by modern engineers and preservationists. You are in your own small way, contributing to that ongoing assessment, one daily damp inspection at a time. As you walk, you might run a calloused hand over the cold, rough surface of a particularly weathered granite block, feeling its ancient solidity, its deep, resonant chill. Perhaps you notice a new patch where the mortar has crumbled away, exposing the raw edges of the stones, and you make a mental note to try and effect a temporary repair with some coarse cement or even just tightly packed clay when the weather allows a constant, mostly losing battle against the encroaching decay. There might be a local legend, a tale passed down from a previous keeper, or a very occasional, very old visiting fisherman, that the true foundation stone of this particular lighthouse was laid not with mortar, but with a mixture of bullock's blood and a specific, now forgotten magical incantation designed to appease the restless spirits of the sea and ensure the tower's eternal stability. You might even have a particular oddly shaped foundation stone that you always touch for good luck during your inspection, a small silent ritual in this vast, uncaring landscape. You crane your neck, your sow, Wester offering scant protection as the wind whips salt spray into your eyes, and scan the higher reaches of the tower. You look for any signs of dislodged coping stones around the gallery beneath the lantern room. Any damage to the thick glass panes of the lantern itself, a constant worry as a particularly determined seabird or a piece of storm-flung debris could cause a catastrophic breakage, or any issues with the iron railings or the copper dome that caps the structure. A flock of gulls, or perhaps some tough vociferous terns, might have established a precarious nesting colony on one of the narrow ledges, high up their white droppings, streaking the gray stone like mournful tears. They shriek at you indignantly as you pass below a daily chorus of disapproval at your intrusion into their windswept domain. The job description you often think should have included must enjoy long windswept walks around very large, very damp stone cylinders, high tolerance for indignant seabirds, and their associated sanitary challenges a definite plus. The sounds are immense elemental. The roar of the waves as they crash against the base of the cliffs, sending plumes of white water high into the air, a sound that you feel as much as hear, a deep, visceral vibration that resonates through the very rock beneath your feet. The howl of the wind as it scours the face of the tower, creating strange fluting notes as it passes over projecting stonework or through the narrow ventilation slits. The constant piercing cries of the seabirds. Gulls, petrels, perhaps, even the majestic soaring albatross far out to sea. Their voices wild and free, a stark contrast to your own confined, duty-bound existence. Sometimes a particularly large wave will strike the base of the cliff with such force that a fine mist of spray will carry all the way up to your exposed position on the narrow walkway, drenching you anew, tasting sharply of salt and the cold, clean immensity of the ocean. You wipe the water from your face, your oilskins shedding the worst of it, and continue your careful, methodical circuit. This tower, you reflect, has seen more weather, more storms, more relentless, soul-scouring wind than a particularly ancient and philosophically inclined albatross with an advanced meteorological degree and a lifetime subscription to Gales Illustrated Having completed your circumnavigation of the tower's base and satisfied yourself as much as one ever can be that it is still standing firm against the relentless onslaught of nature, that its weathered bones are for now holding true, you might then turn your attention to any outbuildings, your small cottage, a store shed for oil and supplies, perhaps a rainwater tank. These too require constant vigilance, constant small repairs in this environment where everything seems determined to rust, to rot, to be scoured away by salt and wind. The inspection complete, you stand for a moment, leaning into the wind, gazing out at the vast, turbulent gray-green expanse of the Southern Ocean. It stretches to the horizon, an endless, restless, and utterly indifferent entity. The tower behind you, your solitary stone companion, feels like the only fixed point in a world of constant chaotic motion. With a final appraising look at its sturdy, enduring form, you prepare to retreat back into its relative shelter, perhaps to climb once more to the lantern room or a small watch room just below it, to begin the long, quiet, and often profoundly lonely hours of simply observing that vast, empty, and ever-changing sea. You ascend once more those familiar spiraling stone steps, leaving the raw, blustery embrace of the tower's base and the immediate visceral concerns of its weathered stonework behind you. The air within the tower, though still cool and carrying the faint, ever-present scent of damp stone and old oil, feels almost calm, almost sheltered after the boisterous assault of the wind outside. You make your way up to the lantern room itself, or perhaps to a smaller, slightly less exposed watch room just beneath it. A tiny chamber equipped with a sturdy chair, a small desk for your logbook, and windows that offer a commanding, if often rather gray and monotonous view of the vast surrounding ocean. This will be your domain for many of the daylight hours, a solitary perch from which to keep your long and often uneventful vigil. You settle into your worn wooden chair, its legs perhaps uneven from the slightly sloping stone floor, its back smoothed by years of your own solitary leaning. Before you, through the thick, salt-hazed glass of the windows, stretches the ocean. It is an immense, heaving, gray-green expanse, reaching out to a horizon that seems impossibly distant, a blurred line where the restless water meets the equally restless, cloud-strewn sky. There is nothing else. No friendly islands, no distant smudge of mainland beyond your own isolated headland, no other lighthouses winking a greeting across the miles. Just the sea in all its vast, empty, and utterly indifferent majesty. Your primary activity for the next several hours: competitive staring contest with said horizon. The horizon, with its millennia of practice in stoic indifference, usually wins hands down. The light of the mid-morning, if the sun has managed to pierce the thick blanket of cloud that so often shrouds this coastline, might cast a pale, watery illumination into your small chamber, highlighting the fine film of salt that seems to perpetually recoat the window panes, no matter how diligently you clean them. More often than not, however, the light is a diffuse, pearly gray, the color of gulls' wings against a stormy sky, a light that seems to absorb all warmth, all cheer, leaving only a sense of profound, unending melancholy. The ocean's daily entertainment program, you often reflect, consists primarily of endless gray waves, the morning edition, followed by the equally thrilling matinee performance of more endless gray waves with occasional unbilled seagull cameo appearances. Your task during these long daylight hours is one of patient, largely unrewarded observation. You scan the horizon back and forth, your eyes trained by long practice, searching for any tiny speck, any anomalous smudge, any distant, almost invisible triangle that might resolve itself into the sail of a passing ship. Ships are rare in these waters, especially this far out from the main coastal shipping routes that might connect the burgeoning colonial ports of Sydney, Melbourne, or Adelaide. Your lighthouse stands guard over a particularly treacherous stretch of coast, a place of hidden reefs, unpredictable currents, and sudden violent storms, a place that most sensible mariners would give a very wide berth indeed if they knew what was good for them. The actual frequency of significant ship sightings by keepers stationed in these truly remote 19th century Australian lighthouses, especially those positioned far from major established shipping lanes or before the full development of coastal trade, and how this observed, often sparse reality might have matched or, more likely, starkly contrasted with the official expectations for constant vigilance implied in their duties or the rather more dramatic potential for life-saving intervention. Sometimes highlighted in popular romanticized accounts of lighthouse life, is often difficult to verify conclusively from surviving official lighthouse logbooks alone, which could be, shall we say, variably maintained or sometimes prone to embellishment to relieve the sheer tedium. Mostly you see nothing but the endless rhythmic procession of waves marching in from the vast emptiness of the Southern Ocean to hurl themselves with a dull, thunderous roar against the cliffs below your tower. You watch the patterns of the water, the way the wind whips the tops of the waves into white frothy manes, the subtle shifts in color as a patch of sunlight briefly breaks through the clouds, turning a patch of gray sea into a momentary dazzling expanse of turquoise or deep sapphire, only to be extinguished again by the next scudding cloud. You become a connoisseur of emptiness, a highly specialized expert in the infinite variations of nothing much happening at all. The sounds are a constant, unchanging backdrop to your vigil. The deep, resonant boom of the waves. The high, mournful whistle of the wind as it circles the lantern housing or sighs through the cracks in the window frames. The occasional startled cry of a gannet or an albatross as it wheels past on a current of air. Sometimes, if the wind is particularly strong, the entire stone tower will emit a low, almost imperceptible hum, a deep, resonant vibration that you feel more in your bones than hear with your ears, as if the ancient stones themselves are singing a slow, mournful song of their own enduring solitude. Hours pass. Time in this isolated outpost takes on a different quality. It is not measured by the urgent ticking of a clock or the clamor of a busy street, but by the slow, inexorable crawl of the sun across the sky when it is visible by the subtle turning of the tide, by the gradual lengthening or shortening of the shadows cast by the tower itself. You might mark the passage of an hour by the way a particular patch of lichen on the window ledge is finally touched by a sunbeam or by the predictable appearance of a certain group of cormorants that always seem to fish near the reef to the west around mid-morning. Sometimes, if the conditions are just right and your eyes are particularly keen, you might spot a distant spout of water on the horizon, a pod of migrating whales, perhaps southern right or humpback, making their massive, mysterious journey along the coast, Or closer in, a small group of dolphins might suddenly appear leaping and playing in the surf, their sleek dark forms, a brief, joyful, and entirely unexpected flash of life in the otherwise empty expanse. These are rare, precious moments, tiny jewels of eventfulness in a vast desert of monotony. You've learned over your years here to read the clouds with a certain degree of accuracy, a skill born of necessity and long observation. You know that those high feathery mare's tails often herald an approaching front and a change in the weather. You recognize the dark, bruised belly of a mackerel sky as a sign of impending rain and strong winds. These subtle shifts in the atmospheric canvas are your primary form of news, your daily weather report delivered without the aid of barometers or telegraph wires, just the keen observation of a lonely man who has learned to speak the language of the sky and sea. But mostly the ocean remains stubbornly, magnificently empty. The horizon is a clean, unbroken line. The hours drag. The sheer, unadulterated monotony of it all can be a heavy weight, a soporific blanket that threatens to lull your senses into a state of dull, unthinking torpor. Your mind, starved of external stimulus, might begin to drift to wander down strange, half-forgotten pathways of memory, or to conjure up elaborate, improbable daydreams. The vastness of the gray expanse before you seems to invite such mental excursions. And as another hour passes, marked only by the slight shift in the angle of the pale light and the continued relentless roar of the sea, your hands idle for too long begin to feel a certain restlessness, a need for some small, tangible task to anchor your drifting thoughts and occupy the endless, empty stretch of time. The endless expanse of gray ocean continues to stretch before you, an unchanging, indifferent canvas upon which the wind paints its invisible, restless patterns. Hours have passed since your morning inspection of the tower, hours filled with nothing but the vast emptiness of the sea, the rhythmic crash of waves far below, and the mournful symphony of the wind. Your eyes ache from the constant, fruitless scanning of the horizon, and your mind, starved of any meaningful external stimulus, has begun to wander down increasingly well-trodden and often rather gloomy pathways of memory and melancholic speculation. The sheer, unadulterated monotony of this solitary vigil can be a heavy weight, a soporific blanket that threatens to smother alertness and invite a dull, listless torpor. It is at times like these, when the ocean offers nothing but its own vast indifference, that your hands begin to feel an itch, a restlessness, a deep-seated need for some small, tangible task to anchor your drifting thoughts and occupy the seemingly infinite stretch of time until your next official duty calls. You rise from your worn wooden observation chair, its creaks a familiar accompaniment to your movements, and turn from the salt-hazed window. Tucked away in a corner of your small watchroom, or perhaps in a sea chest in your Spartan living quarters below, is your small collection of items for just such an occasion. You might retrieve your whittling knife, its blade kept surprisingly keen against a smooth piece of slate and a promising piece of driftwood you found on your last beachcombing expedition, gnarled and gray, seasoned by salt and sun, its strange, twisted shape perhaps already suggesting a fantastic creature, a grotesque face, or the sleek form of a seabird. Or perhaps today, your inclination is towards more practical, if equally repetitive, labor. You might unroll a section of your fishing net, if you are permitted to supplement your meager rations with whatever you can catch from the rocks below, and find that a recent storm has torn new holes in its sturdy twine. Your mending kit, a large blunt-ended needle made of bone or polished hardwood, a ball of coarse, tarred hempen twine, and perhaps a small, smooth stone used as a kind of thimble, is always at the ready. Let us say today it is the driftwood that calls to you. You settle back into your chair or perhaps find a more comfortable spot on the floor, leaning against the cool stone wall and begin to turn the piece of wood over in your hands. It smells faintly of the sea of salt of old waterlogged timber, perhaps even a hint of the distant unknown shore from which it began its long, tumbling journey to your isolated beach. Its surface is smooth in places, worn by the endless caress of sand and waves, and rough and splintery in others, where the grain has been exposed or a branch has been torn away. You run your thumb over its contours, feeling its texture, its weight, its balance, imagining the shape that might lie hidden within. You're not just whittling, you're engaged in a profound and deeply personal dialogue with a piece of artisanal, storm-tossed, ocean-seasoned driftwood. A very niche, very lonely, but occasionally quite rewarding profession. With slow, careful strokes of your knife, you begin to remove the first tentative shavings. They curl away from the blade, pale crescents, against the darker weathered surface of the wood, and fall silently to the stone floor around your feet, releasing an even stronger, cleaner scent of dry timber. There's a deep satisfaction in this simple creative act, in the feel of the sharp blade biting into the wood in the gradual emergence of a form from the formless. You are not a master carver, perhaps not like the skilled artisans who create the intricate figureheads for great sailing ships or the ornate decorations for grand city churches. Your creations are simpler, cruder born, more of a need to occupy the hands and quiet the mind than of any great artistic ambition. You might carve a rough likeness of a gull, its wings outstretched, or a sleek, imaginary fish, or perhaps just abstract patterns, swirls, and notches that follow the natural grain of the wood. Your current project, turning a vaguely foot-shaped piece of ancient sea-battered wood into a slightly more convincingly bird-shaped piece of ancient sea-battered wood. It's thrilling cutting-edge stuff, at least by the standards of a profoundly isolated 19th-century lighthouse keeper. The extent to which lighthouse keepers in such profoundly isolated 19th-century posts, often men of practical but not necessarily artistic backgrounds, engaged in what might be termed leisure or creative activities, such as carving, model making, or even writing, versus purely functional crafts aimed at maintaining their essential equipment, mending their clothing, or improving their immediate living environment. And how these often intertwined activities were viewed or even implicitly encouraged by the lighthouse service authorities as a means of preserving mental equilibrium and combating the well-documented psychological stresses of extreme solitude is often subtly gleaned by historians from between the lines of spare official logbook entries, surviving personal correspondence, or the occasional poignant discovery of such handcrafted objects left behind at abandoned stations. The repetitive rhythmic motion of the knife, the focused concentration required to guide the blade, the slow, almost imperceptible transformation of the wood beneath your hands. All of this has a deeply meditative, almost hypnotic quality. The endless roar of the sea outside fades to a distant murmur. The howling of the wind becomes a mere sigh. Your mind, which was previously either racing with anxious thoughts or sinking into a state of dull apathy, now settles into a calm, focused stillness. Each curl of wood that falls away is like a small worry, a tiny piece of the vast, overwhelming monotony being shed and discarded. Or perhaps today the nets call for your attention. You spread out a section of the coarse, tarred fishing net on the floor, its familiar, slightly sticky, fishy aroma filling your small space. You find the tear a ragged hole where a sharp rock or a particularly determined and uncooperative crab has done its work. You thread your large bone needle with a length of a specific strong twine, perhaps one you made yourself from dried strands of a particular type of tough seaweed or plaited sinew, a piece of local self-taught knowledge essential for survival in this remote place where new supplies are a rare and precious event. You begin the patient work of mending your fingers, moving with a practiced, if somewhat clumsy dexterity, weaving the new twine through the old, creating a strong, neat patch replicating the intricate diamond pattern of the original net. Each knot must be tied just so secure enough to hold against the strain of a thrashing fish, but not so tight as to weaken the surrounding fibers. The nets you often think have more holes than a government budget that's been through a particularly vigorous parliamentary debate. But slowly, stitch by patient stitch, you are winning the ongoing battle against entropy, or at least against very small, very determined fish, attempting to make an unauthorized early departure. These are not just idle pastimes. In this isolated existence, self-sufficiency is not a virtue. It is a stark necessity. Every item of clothing must be mended and remended until it is little more than a patchwork of repairs. Every tool must be kept in working order. Every opportunity to supplement your meager, monotonous rations with fresh fish from the sea, or perhaps a few edible seabird eggs, carefully gathered from the less accessible cliff ledges, a dangerous and often fruitless pursuit must be seized. The skills of mending, of basic carpentry, of improvisation and making do were essential for survival for any individual in such a remote 19th century outpost, whether they were lighthouse keepers, shepherds in the high country, or solitary prospectors searching for gold in the vast, unmapped interior. The light from the window shifts, lengthens as the sun continues its slow journey across the sky. You become lost in your work, the hours slipping by unnoticed, marked only by the growing pile of wood shavings at your feet or the steadily shrinking hole in your fishing net. It is a quiet, solitary industry, a small act of creation or restoration in a world that often feels defined by emptiness and the slow, relentless forces of decay. But eventually your back begins to ache from your hunched position, or your eyes grow tired from the close work, or perhaps you simply run out of a suitable piece of driftwood that inspires your blade. The restlessness, or perhaps just the need for a change of scenery, however limited that scenery might be, begins to stir within you once more. The thought of stretching your legs, of feeling the wind on your face, of perhaps seeing what new treasures or tribulations the tide might have washed onto the lonely stretch of beach at the foot of your cliff begins to take hold. The urge to stretch your legs to escape the confines of the stone tower, even for a short while, and to breathe air that isn't thick with the faint, lingering scent of lamp oil and solitude, becomes too strong to ignore. Your whittling or your net mending lies half finished on the small wooden table, a testament to an hour or two rested from the slow, indifferent passage of time. But now the vast, turbulent ocean outside, your small, salt-caked windows, calls to you not with an invitation to sail its stormy waters, but with the quieter, more intimate promise of its desolate, wave-swept shores. It is time for your daily constitutional, a lonely perambulation along the rugged coastline that serves as the precarious foundation for your solitary stone sentinel. You're not just going for a walk on the beach. You're engaging in an extreme sport called spotting something, literally anything that isn't a wave, a rock, or a particularly opinionated seagull. You pull on your heavy oilskin coat, its surface stiff and slightly sticky, and your trusty sou'wester hat tying its chin strap firmly against the ever-present wind. The journey down from your watchroom or living quarters involves another descent of those spiraling stone stairs, which even in the gray daylight seem to hold a certain chilly, echoing gloom. As you reach the heavy oak door at the base of the tower, you can hear the roar of the surf more clearly, a deep, resonant booming that vibrates through the very stones of the lighthouse. You unlatch the door, and it's immediately snatched from your grasp by a gust of wind slamming open against the outer wall with a resounding crash. That would be alarming if it weren't such a common, almost daily occurrence. Stepping outside, you are met by the full, unbridled force of the coastal elements. The wind is a boisterous, Anseline companion, whipping your oilskins against your legs, tugging at your hat, and filling your nostrils with the sharp, invigorating, and deeply familiar scent of salt seaweed and damp, cold rock. The sky is likely a vast, shifting canvas of gray clouds, occasionally torn open to reveal a patch of watery pale blue, or perhaps threatening a fresh onslaught of rain. This specific stretch of the Australian coastline where your lighthouse stands, its lonely guard, was likely chosen for its very ruggedness, its treacherous reefs, and its propensity for sudden violent storms. All excellent reasons for a lighthouse, and all equally excellent reasons for a lighthouse keeper to develop a profound appreciation for sturdy outerwear and a philosophical acceptance of perpetual dampness. You make your way carefully along the narrow, winding path that leads down the cliff face to the small crescent-shaped beach or rocky cove that nestles at the tower's feet. The path is steep, often slippery with sea spray or loose scree, and requires your full attention. One misplaced step could send you tumbling down towards the churning, kelp-strewn waves below a rather undignified and almost certainly terminal end to your lonely vigil. The local real estate slogan, if one were ever so foolish as to try and market this particular piece of isolated wind-blasted property, would probably read, "Stunning coastal living, uninterrupted sea views, absolutely no neighbors for at least 100 miles in any direction. Warning may induce severe existential crisis and a tendency to talk to seabirds." Finally, you reach the shore. It might be a stretch of coarse grayish sand littered with smooth, sea-worn pebbles and tangled banks of dark, leathery kelp ripped from the offshore reefs by the relentless waves. Or perhaps it's a jumble of massive, time-sculpted granite boulders, their surfaces slick with green algae and dotted with tiny hardy barnacles and limpets clinging on for dear life. The waves crash onto the shore with a thunderous rhythmic roar, sending plumes of white spray high into the air, then drag back with a gravelly sigh, pulling pebbles and shells with them in their relentless ebb and flow. The sound is immense, overwhelming, a constant, powerful reminder of nature's raw, untamed energy. You begin your slow, meandering walk along the tide line, your eyes scanning the assortment of debris cast up by the recent high tide. This is beachcombing lighthouse keeper style. You're not searching for pirate treasure or messages in bottles, though a tiny irrational part of your profoundly bored mind might still cling to that romantic, if entirely improbable notion. You are looking for anything useful, anything interesting, anything at all to break the monotony. Mostly you find driftwood, gnarled, bleached, salt-encrusted pieces of timber, some small enough to tuck into your pocket for later, whittling, others massive, waterlogged logs that have clearly traveled a great distance, perhaps the remnants of a ship lost long ago, or a tree washed down some distant river and carried out to sea only to be returned to land in this desolate spot. Each piece has a story, if only you could read it. You might find interesting shells, the delicate pearly spirals of a sea snail, the heavy robust casing of a large whelk, or perhaps the intricate fan-shaped valve of a scallop. Its colors faded by the sun and sea, but its form still perfect. Sometimes a particularly vibrant type of seaweed washes ashore, perhaps a deep, iridescent blue, or a startling, almost artificial-looking crimson, a splash of unexpected color in this otherwise muted landscape. There's a local legend, or perhaps just a half-remembered tale from a very old, very infrequent visitor, that a particular type of deep purple seaweed, which only appears after the fiercest southerly gales, can be dried and brewed into a tea that grants prophetic dreams, though you suspect it's more likely to grant a severe case of indigestion. The impact of isolated lighthouse construction and continuous, albeit minimal, human habitation on the immediate coastal microecologies and the fragile dune systems of 19th century Australia, particularly concerning subtle shoreline changes. Any localized disturbance to native coastal vegetation or potential alterations in the behavior of local wildlife is an area where detailed historical environmental impact data from that period is often quite limited and therefore subject to ongoing research and careful ecological reconstruction by modern scientists. Seabirds are your most constant companions on these lonely walks. Gulls shriek and wheel overhead, their cries sharp and plaintive. Black and white oyster catchers, with their bright orange beaks and legs, pick their way delicately amongst the rock pools, probing for shellfish. Perhaps a majestic sea eagle or a peregrine falcon circles high above, riding the updrafts. From the cliffs, its keen eyes scanning the waves for prey. You watch them with a mixture of envy for their freedom and a certain detached scientific interest in their habits. They at least seem perfectly at home in this wild, windswept world. You walk on the wind, tugging at your oilskins, the roar of the surf a constant thunder in your ears. The sheer unadulterated solitude of this place is at times almost overwhelming. There is no other human footprint in the sand, no distant curl of smoke from a friendly chimney, no sound but the elements and the cries of the wild creatures. It is just you, the tower, the sea, and the sky. It is a loneliness so profound it almost becomes a presence in itself, a vast, silent, and occasionally rather judgmental companion. After an hour or so, having collected perhaps a few interesting pieces of driftwood, a pocketful of unusually shaped shells, or simply having stretched your legs and cleared your head with the raw, salt-laden air, you turn back towards the lighthouse. It stands tall and gray against the turbulent sky, a stubborn man-made finger of defiance against the vastness of nature. As you approach its base, you might pause one last time. At the water's edge, your gaze sweeping out across the endless heaving expanse of the ocean. Your eyes still instinctively, almost unconsciously, scanning that distant, unbroken horizon for any sign, any hint, however faint, of the one thing that could truly break this profound and aching isolation, the distant, longed-for smoke of the supply ship. The days blur into a monotonous, indistinct sequence, each one a near-perfect replica of the last, marked only by the subtle shifts in the wind's direction, the changing moods of the vast gray ocean, and the slow, relentless turning of the great lamp mechanism through the equally unchanging dark nights. Your solitary breakfast of salty porridge gives way to hours spent gazing out from the lantern room, which in turn gives way to your lonely beach combing, then perhaps some whittling or mending, and then the meticulous ritual of preparing and lighting the lamp as dusk once more smudges the western sky. It is a life stripped bare, reduced to its most essential repetitive elements. And through it all, a new quiet but increasingly insistent hum begins to underscore your existence. The hope, the need, the ever-growing anticipation of the supply ship. It has been weeks now, perhaps even a month or more, since its last visit. You try to keep a rough tally of the days on your slate, or by making small notches on a piece of driftwood, but time itself in this profound isolation has a habit of becoming fluid, unreliable. The official schedule as outlined in the Lighthouse Service Directives, a document you keep tucked away with your logbook, and which you now know by heart, suggests a visit roughly every 3 months, weather and other unforeseen circumstances permitting. Unforeseen circumstances, you have learned, is a wonderfully elastic term that can encompass anything from genuine, terrifying Southern Ocean gales that can last for weeks to a simple administrative oversight in some distant port city, or perhaps just the supply ship's captain deciding to take an unscheduled detour to investigate a particularly promising-looking whale spout. The logistical challenges, the actual frequency, and the overall reliability of successfully supplying these extremely remote colonial lighthouses, scattered along the vast and often notoriously treacherous coastline of 19th-century Australia, especially those isolated stations perpetually exposed to difficult and unpredictable weather patterns, like the ferocious gales of the roaring 40s and the subsequent very real psychological and practical impact of inevitable provisioning, delays on the often solitary keeper's physical well-being, their dwindling stores, and their already strained morale are subjects often illuminated by the careful analysis of terse official government correspondence, stark station logbook entries, detailing near-empty barrels, and the occasional poignant personal letters that somehow made their way back to civilization. And so you watch the horizon. It becomes an obsession, a ritual, a focal point for all your dwindling reserves of hope. Every spare moment when your immediate duties do not demand your full attention finds your gaze drawn irresistibly eastward or from whichever direction the ship is known to make its approach. You climb to the lantern gallery, even in the biting wind, your oilskins flapping, and scan the vast, empty arc, where sea meets sky, using the old brass telescope that is part of your official equipment. Its lens slightly fogged and scratched from years of salt spray and rough handling. You are basically playing the world's slowest, most incredibly high stakes, and usually entirely unrewarding game of I Spy. And the only thing you ever consistently spy is more ocean, occasionally a slightly different shade of more ocean, or on very exciting days, a particularly large and unidentifiable seabird that is definitely not a ship. Your supplies are beginning to run low. The sack of oatmeal is noticeably lighter. The tea caddy contains only a few precious pinches of dusty leaves. Your last few candles are guttering down to their stumps. The kerosene or whale oil for the great lamp itself is carefully measured each night's consumption, a small worrying deduction from a finite resource. But more than the dwindling physical stores, it is the dwindling supply of human connection, of news from the outside world that weighs most heavily. The supply ship is not just a floating larder. It is your only link, however tenuous, however infrequent, to the bustling, distant world of men and women, of towns and cities, of events and ideas that exist beyond this lonely, wind-scoured rock. It brings newspapers, however out-of-date letters from family, if you are fortunate enough to have family who writes new books, perhaps, and most importantly, another human face, another human voice, even if only for a few brief, chaotic hours. While supplies are unloaded and your meager outgoing mail is collected, the horizon plays cruel tricks on you. A distant, low-lying bank of cloud can, for a heart-stopping moment, resemble the smudge of smoke from a ship's funnel if it were a steam-assisted vessel. Though your supply tender is more likely a sturdy, salt-caked sailing brig or schooner relying on the same capricious winds that buffet your tower. A flock of distant shearwaters, skimming low over the waves, can momentarily arrange themselves into the shape of a far-off sail. A particularly large wave, breaking unexpectedly on a hidden reef, miles out can send up a plume of white water that your hope-starved eyes instantly, desperately try to interpret as a ship's canvas. Each of these false sightings is a small, sharp stab of disappointment, a tiny erosion of your carefully hoarded optimism. Your social calendar for the foreseeable future, you reflect with a grim smile, reads something like Tuesday, stare intently at horizon. Wednesday, stare at horizon with considerably more feeling. Thursday, possible excitement on the distant skyline. Know upon closer inspection just a particularly large cloud shaped vaguely like a profound and lingering disappointment. You might have a specific tattered old flag that you are instructed by the Lighthouse service regulations to hoist upon sighting the supply vessel, a signal to guide it in towards the safest, if still rather precarious landing spot at the base of your cliffs, weather permitting. Or perhaps you are meant to prepare a small bonfire of driftwood at a designated point, its smoke a visible beacon during daylight hours. You find yourself checking these signaling supplies, ensuring the flag is not too frayed. The wood for the fire kept dry, small acts of preparedness that feed the fragile flame of anticipation. You might even find yourself rehearsing in your mind the things you will say to the ship's captain, the questions you will ask about news from Sydney or Melbourne or even far off England. Sometimes, as you stare out at the endless, heaving gray, you're almost certain you can hear it. The faint rhythmic creak of rigging, the distant shout of a sailor, the thrum of a ship's heart. But it is only the wind playing its usual tricks. or the sea sighing against the rocks, or perhaps just the desperate, hopeful imaginings of your own profoundly isolated mind. The supply ship, it often seems, operates on eventually a clock, a highly flexible and entirely unpredictable time zone, known chiefly for its complete and utter disregard for your dwindling supply of tea biscuits and your sanity. Another day draws to a close. The sun, a fiery orange ball, sinks once more into the vast, indifferent ocean, leaving behind a sky streaked with crimson and purple, a brief, spectacular display of celestial artistry that does little to soothe the ache of your solitude. The horizon remains stubbornly, magnificently empty. The disappointment is a familiar companion, now a dull ache that settles in your chest, alongside the cold and the weariness. With a heavy sigh, you turn from the darkening window of the lantern room, the hope for today extinguished along with the daylight. It is time to light the great lamp to begin your nightly vigil once more, and to seek what little comfort and distraction you can find in the familiar lamplit solitude of your small room, perhaps with one of your last few well-read books, as you wait and watch for another dawn and another chance, however faint, of spotting that longed-for sail. The great lamp above you now sweeps its powerful solitary beam across the tumultuous, inky blackness of the night sea, a steadfast, rhythmic pulse in the vast surrounding darkness. Your duties in the lantern room for this part of the evening at least are done. The wicks are trimmed, the fuel reservoir topped up, the complex clockwork mechanism, if your lighthouse is so equipped, wound and ticking with a steady, reassuring beat, ensuring the precise rotation of the magnificent Fresnel lens. You have consumed your meager solitary supper, perhaps some more of that remarkably resilient hardtack biscuit, softened in weak tea, or a reheated portion of yesterday's rather uninspiring stew of salted beef and dried peas. The culinary highlights are few and far between in this isolated domain. Now, with the wind howling a mournful symphony outside your thick stone walls, and the sea roaring its endless percussive accompaniment, the long, quiet hours of the evening stretch before you, a vast expanse of time to be filled somehow, before your next watch in the lantern room or the blessed if brief oblivion of sleep. You make your way down from the upper levels of the tower, or perhaps you're already settled in your small Spartan living quarters at its base or in the adjoining keeper's cottage. The air here is thick with the scent of salt, damp stone, and the faint lingering aroma of your recently consumed, unexciting meal. You trim the wick of your own small kerosene or whale oil lamp, the one that provides your personal illumination in this lonely outpost. Its flame sputters for a moment, then catches casting a small, warm, flickering pool of yellowish light in the otherwise profound darkness of your room. This little lamp, with its soft, unsteady glow, is your companion, your small, defiant spark against the overwhelming immensity of the night and the ocean. It provides just enough light to read by, and also, you've noted with a certain weary resignation, just enough light to attract every single curious nocturnal insect with a literary inclination within a 5-mile radius. And reading is indeed your primary solace, your main escape, your most treasured way of whittling away these long, solitary evenings. You go to the small, sturdy wooden shelf where your meager collection of books resides. They are few, perhaps only a dozen or so volumes, but they are precious, each one a gateway to another world, another time, another life. There might be a well-thumbed Bible, its pages softened and worn at the edges, a book of rather sentimental poetry, its verses filled with tragic heroines and noble sentiments, a technical manual on lighthouse optics and lamp maintenance, its diagrams complex and its prose dry as dust, but utterly essential. And perhaps if you are truly fortunate, one or two novels. Their covers battered their spines, cracked their pages, bearing the faint brownish stains of countless tea spills or encounters with damp sea air, the precise types and overall quantity of reading material typically available to and actually consumed by lighthouse keepers stationed at these exceptionally remote 19th century colonial posts, and the demonstrable role of such literacy and access to print in mitigating the profound psychological effects of extreme isolation and unyielding sensory monotony is often pieced together by maritime historians and literary scholars from often quite scant direct evidence, such as surviving water-damaged book fragments found at abandoned lighthouse sites, poignant mentions in official logbook entries of reading to pass the time, or deductions made from general literacy rates and book distribution patterns of the period. Tonight you select an old, cherished favorite, perhaps a stirring tale of adventure on the high seas by Captain Marryat, or a sprawling, improbable romance by Mrs. Oliphant, its pages filled with societal intrigue and deeply misunderstood governesses. The book feels like an old friend in your hands, its cover softened with use, its pages bearing the faint, musty aroma of old paper and time. You settle into your one sturdy wooden chair, pulling it close to the small table where your lamp casts its flickering circle of light. You open the book, the rustle of its worn pages, a soft, comforting sound against the constant, deeper roar of the wind and waves outside. This book has been read so many times that the characters within its pages feel less like fictional creations and more like old, slightly eccentric and occasionally rather argumentative roommates. The print is small, the lines closely packed, typical of 19th century publishing, designed to cram as much edification or entertainment as possible into the available space. The lamplight flickers, making the words seem to dance slightly on the page, and you have to hold the book at just the right angle to avoid the glare or the deep shadows. But soon the discomforts of your physical surroundings, the chill in the air, the hardness of your chair, the faint, ever-present smell of kerosene begin to recede as you lose yourself in the world of the story. You're no longer a lonely lighthouse keeper on a desolate stretch of Australian coast. You're a brave naval officer battling pirates in the Caribbean, or a witty young lady navigating the treacherous drawing rooms of Regency London, or perhaps even an intrepid explorer discovering lost civilizations in the heart of a steaming jungle. For a few precious hours, these pages offer an escape, a connection to a wider, more vibrant, more populated world. You might have a particular passage in this very book, a scene of great heroism or profound emotional depth, or perhaps just a particularly well-turned phrase that you reread often. It's familiarity, a source of comfort and quiet inspiration on particularly long or stormy nights. Or you might carefully press interesting pieces of dried seaweed or tiny, perfectly formed flattened shells you found on your beachcombing excursions between the pages of your books, using them as makeshift bookmarks and as tangible, fragile mementos of your solitary connection with this wild, elemental place. You take great care of these few precious volumes, protecting them as best you can from the insidious dampness that pervades everything in this tower, perhaps wrapping them in oilskin when not in use, or keeping them stored in a relatively dry sea chest. The only sounds are the soft hiss and sputter of your lamp, the gentle rustle of a page turning, and the ceaseless, powerful voice of the ocean outside. The crash of waves against the cliffs, the deep resonant boom as they break on unseen reefs, the high mournful whistle of the wind as it scours the lantern glass far above you. Sometimes a particularly strong gust will rattle the window pane in its frame or send a strange sighing sound down the chimney of your small stove, making you look up for a moment, your attention briefly pulled back from the fictional world to the stark reality of your isolated existence. But then you return to your book, to the company of its characters, to the unfolding of its plot. Your evening entertainment, a thrilling page turner from perhaps 1852, or maybe just the slightly less thrilling but equally engrossing shipping news from a newspaper that is at least 6 months out of date. The suspense is guaranteed, mostly concerning whether the ink will have faded too much to read, or if the next page you turn will simply crumble into dust. The kerosene in your lamp burns steadily its soft glow, creating a tiny, fragile haven of light and imagination against the vast, encroaching darkness of the night and the immensity of the Southern Ocean. You are absorbed, transported the lonely tower, forgotten for a little while. But even as you lose yourself in the trials and tribulations of fictional heroes and heroines, a part of your mind remains attuned to the world outside. The wind, which has been a constant, if somewhat monotonous companion throughout the evening, begins to change its tune. Its steady moan deepens, its whistling gusts become more frequent, more powerful, more insistent. It starts to sound less like a mournful complaint and more like an angry, gathering roar, hinting that the night ahead might have more dramatic and considerably less literary events in store for you than simply discovering whether the brave midshipman will finally win the hand of the admiral's beautiful, if somewhat headstrong, daughter. The change in the wind's tone from a mournful sighing complaint to a deeper, more guttural, and increasingly insistent roar is the first true signal that your quiet evening of literary escapism is drawing to an abrupt and rather unwelcome close. The pages of your well-worn novel, detailing the improbable adventures of brave midshipmen, or the delicate social maneuvering of misunderstood governesses, begin to flutter erratically in the strengthening drafts that now seem to be seeping from every invisible crack in your small, lamp-lit room. The steady, comforting hiss of your personal kerosene lamp is now punctuated by anxious little sputters as the air currents buffet its small flame. Outside, the sea, which had been a constant rhythmic grumble, begins to sound like a vast, enraged beast, hurling itself against the cliffs with a violence that makes the very stone beneath your feet tremble. This isn't just a bit of a blow. This is the overture to one of the Southern Ocean's more dramatic and thoroughly unpleasant theatrical productions. You reluctantly mark your page. The brave midshipman was just about to confront the villainous pirate king, a moment of high drama now to be indefinitely postponed, and close the precious book, perhaps tucking it away securely in your sea chest to protect it from the inevitable increase in ambient dampness. Your attention and your responsibility must now turn entirely to the real and far more pressing drama unfolding outside and to the great unwavering lamp that burns high above you. In the lantern room, the lamp whose steady beam is now more critical than ever. It was, of course, lit at dusk. Its flame trimmed its mechanism wound hours ago, ready for its nightly vigil. Your current, more personal lamplit reading was a small indulgence before the deeper hours of the night watch truly began, or perhaps during a brief respite, if you have an assistant keeper to share the burden. Though tonight in this story, you are utterly, comprehensively alone. You make your way from your relatively sheltered living quarters, back up those familiar spiraling stone stairs towards the lantern room. Each step upwards seems to bring you closer to the heart of the storm's fury. The wind shrieks around the tower, now a high-pitched, almost demonic banshee wail, and the solid stone structure itself seems to groan and shudder under the repeated concussive impacts of monstrous waves crashing against its base. Rain, which had perhaps been a mere drizzle earlier or absent altogether, now begins to lash against the thick glass panes of the upper levels with the force of thrown gravel. This isn't just a storm. It's Mother Nature's emphatic way of reminding you that your cozy little world of books and lamplight is a very small, very fragile bubble in a very large, very angry ocean. Reaching the lantern room, you are met by a chaotic symphony of sound and a disorienting dance of light and shadow. The great lamp itself, its massive Fresnel lens rotating with its usual calm, hypnotic rhythm, still burns brightly its powerful beam, cutting through the maelstrom outside a tiny defiant spear of order hurled against the overwhelming chaos. But the storm rages around it. Sheets of torrential rain, driven by the hurricane-force winds, smash against the thick curved glass of the lantern, making it impossible to see more than a few feet beyond the tower itself. The ocean is a churning, white-fanged tumult, waves exploding against the cliffs in plumes of spray that are flung high into the air, sometimes even reaching the lantern gallery itself, coating the glass with a fresh, opaque layer of salt. The lighthouse is currently experiencing what highly trained and probably very dry structural engineers in a distant, comfortable office might politely term vigorous and sustained dynamic loading conditions, and what you, a solitary, increasingly damp human being trapped inside it, might less politely and with considerably more accuracy term being trapped inside a very tall, very angry, and possibly slightly leaky cement washing machine set to the apocalypse cycle. Your first concern is the lamp. You check the flame, ensuring it is burning steadily, not too high, not too low, despite the vibrations that are now running through the entire tower. You examine the clockwork rotation mechanism, its gears and weights still turning smoothly, though perhaps with a slightly more strained metallic groan than usual. You listen for any new, untoward sounds from within the apparatus itself, a loose-fitting, a strained component, anything that might signal a potential failure. In a storm like this, the light is more than just a guide. It is a desperate, screaming warning. The only thing that stands between any unfortunate vessel caught in this tempest and certain splintering doom on the jagged reefs that guard this treacherous headland. The engineering principles behind the construction of these 19th-century lighthouses, often built on the most exposed and inhospitable promontories, were designed to withstand precisely such elemental fury. But stories of towers damaged or even in very rare and tragic instances, completely overcome by the sea, were a chilling part of lighthouse lore. The actual wind speeds and the truly colossal wave heights encountered by specific isolated 19th century lighthouses during major documented cyclonic gales, or these notorious Southern Ocean tempests, and precisely how accurately their original, often quite innovative structures were designed and robustly constructed to withstand these frequently underestimated extreme environmental forces, based on the meteorological knowledge and available civil engineering capabilities of that particular time, are often subjects of careful historical reconstruction, detailed forensic engineering analysis of surviving structures, and even sophisticated computational fluid dynamics modeling by modern researchers. You, however, are conducting your own very immediate, very hands-on, and slightly terrifying stress test. The tower shudders again as a particularly monstrous wave, a veritable liquid mountain, slams into its base with a sound like the crack of doom, or perhaps just a very large, very angry giant, repeatedly hitting the foundations with an equally large, equally angry stone hammer. You can feel the vibration through the soles of your sea boots, up your legs into your very teeth. You might find yourself instinctively gripping a brass handrail or steadying yourself against the central lamp pedestal as the entire structure seems to sway just for a fraction of an inch, a deeply unsettling sensation when you're perched hundreds of feet above a raging foam-flecked abyss. You're pretty sure the local seabirds, even the toughest, most weather-beaten old albatrosses, have all wisely evacuated to somewhere considerably further inland, by now possibly Tasmania or even further south, perhaps to complain to the penguins about the declining standards of coastal weather. Through a momentary lull in the sheeting rain, you catch a glimpse of the world outside the lantern glass. It is a scene of pure, terrifying elemental chaos. The sea is a maelstrom of black mountainous waves, their crests torn into white frothing spindrift by the wind. The rain drives horizontally. The air is thick with spray and a low, roaring, all-encompassing sound that seems to swallow all other noises. The beam from your lamp cuts into this turmoil, sometimes illuminating a colossal breaking wave just as it curls and crashes, other times seeming to be utterly absorbed, defeated by the sheer density of the storm. It is a humbling, awe-inspiring, and frankly, rather frightening spectacle. Some old keepers' men who have spent their entire lives in such isolated towers develop a strange, almost personal relationship with these great storms. They might even give them names like old adversaries, or particularly boisterous, unwelcome relatives. Ah, here comes old Southerly George. Again, is it? Always arrives in a temper, that one. Or perhaps there's a local superstition, a piece of ingrained sea lore that suggests one should never speak ill of the storm while it rages, lest it take offense and redouble its fury. So you watch and you listen, and you tend to your precious light, perhaps, with a silent, respectful acknowledgement of the immense, untamable power that surrounds you. Hours pass in this state of heightened vigilance and sensory bombardment. The storm shows no sign of abating. Sleep is an impossibility. You make your regular checks of the lamp, ensuring its flame is steady, its rotation uninterrupted. You wipe the accumulating salt and spray from the inside of the lantern glass as best you can, though it is a constant losing battle. The wind howls, The tower groans, the sea roars, and your light, your small, defiant beacon, continues to turn to shine to offer its silent, unwavering promise of warning and perhaps of hope to any poor soul who might be out there, lost in the tempest's roaring might. As the deepest part of the night wears on and the storm, finally, after what seems an eternity of fury, begins to show the very first, almost imperceptible signs of easing, its terrible grip, a new exhausted dawn cannot be far away. The day which dawned so bleakly after the long, furious tempest has slowly, wearily run its course. The storm has passed, leaving behind a scoured sky, now painted with the soft, melancholic hues of approaching dusk, and a sea that still heaves with a restless, subsiding anger. You have completed your daytime routines, the meticulous cleaning of the salt-caked lantern glass, the inspection of the tower for any new storm-inflicted wounds, the solitary meal, the long hours spent gazing at the empty horizon, perhaps a little whittling or mending to occupy the restless hands and the even more restless mind. Now, as the light outside begins to fade from gray to a deep bruised purple, and the first faint stars prick the eastern sky, the most crucial ritual of your daily existence approaches. It is time to ignite the beacon, to awaken the great lamp that will guard this treacherous coast through the coming hours of darkness. You climb the winding stone stairs once more, your steps perhaps a little less leaden than they were at dawn, your body having recovered somewhat from the night's ordeal and the day's quiet industry. As you ascend, the temperature drops, and the familiar scent of cool stone salt and old oil greets you. You reach the lantern room, that high glass-walled sanctuary. The immense Fresnel lens, which you so painstakingly polished this morning, stands ready, its myriad prisms catching the last vestiges of the fading daylight, holding them like captured stars. The brasswork of the lamp mechanism, also gleaming from your earlier attentions, reflects the dimming light with a dull, satisfying sheen. Your first task is to make the final preparations. You check the fuel reservoir of the great lamp, whether it's a multi-wick argon burner designed for sperm whale oil or colza oil, or perhaps a more modern, for the mid to late 19th century, kerosene vapor lamp with an incandescent mantle. The transition from older illuminants, like whale oil, to the more efficient and readily available mineral oil kerosene, and then eventually to other even brighter technologies, and the significant impact this technological shift had on lamp design, burner technology, the complexity of daily maintenance routines, crucial fuel storage requirements, and overall light intensity and perceived reliability is a well-documented but intricate and quite multifaceted aspect of maritime safety and 19th century technological history. For now, your lamp, whatever its precise fuel source needs to be full, its wicks perfectly trimmed to ensure a clean, bright, and smoke-free flame. You approach the lamp mechanism. If it has multiple wicks, as many of the larger oil lamps, did you inspect each one with meticulous care, using a small pair of brass wick trimmers to ensure they are perfectly level, free of any charring from the previous night's burning, their tips shaped to produce the optimal flame? An uneven wick can cause the lamp to smoke, suiting up the precious lens and diminishing the light's power, or it can cause the flame to flicker erratically, a dangerous unreliability for any mariner depending on its steady signal. It's a task requiring a surgeon's precision and a watchmaker's patience. You are in this moment less a keeper of the light and more a highly specialized, slightly oily lamp wick hairdresser. Once the wicks are perfect, you check the fuel flow, ensuring all is clear. If it's a clockwork rotation mechanism, you give the heavy weights a final wind, their chains clanking softly in the quiet room, ensuring the great lens will turn smoothly and at the correct prescribed speed throughout the night, sweeping its beam across the dark waters in its unique identifying pattern. Every lighthouse has its own signature: a fixed light, a flashing light, a specific sequence of flashes and eclipses, and maintaining that signature is paramount. Now, with all preparations complete, the moment arrives. The last light of true dusk is fading rapidly from the western sky. The sea below is a vast, dark, and formless expanse. You take a long, thin taper or perhaps a lucifer match if your supplies are modern enough to include such marvels. Though matches in a damp, salt-laden environment are often unreliable, and light it from your small personal oil lamp that you might have brought up with you or from a dedicated tinderbox. Your hand is steady. This is a ritual you have performed countless times, yet it never loses its sense of profound importance, of quiet, solitary responsibility. It's showtime time to turn on the world's largest, most important, and almost certainly least energy efficient coastal nightlight. You carefully apply the small flame to the first wick. It catches, sputters for a moment. A tiny, hesitant orange spark in the vastness of the lantern room, then grows steadies and begins to burn with a clean, bright yellow glow. You move to the next wick and the next until all are alight, their combined flames merging into a single powerful, incandescent heart within the lamp. You adjust each wick minutely, watching the shape and color of the flame, aiming for that perfect, unwavering brilliance, that optimal combustion that will produce the maximum light with the minimum smoke. You are like a conductor, carefully tuning each instrument before a grand performance, leading an orchestra of one very large, very bright, and slightly temperamental, oily instrument. As the lamp reaches its full intensity, a remarkable transformation occurs. The intricate facets of the Fresnel lens, which were just moments ago dull and reflective, now seem to gather and magnify this central blaze, refracting and redirecting it, focusing it into that powerful, life-saving beam. The entire lantern room is suddenly filled with a brilliant, almost blinding white light, a stark contrast to the deepening twilight outside. The first sweep of that beam as the rotation mechanism is engaged and the great lens begins. Its slow, majestic turn feels like a tangible thing, a solid bar of light cutting through the darkness, reaching out for miles across the restless, unseen ocean. You might have a small personal ritual you perform at this moment, a quiet habit born of long solitude and the weight of responsibility. Perhaps you touch a particular worn brass knob on the lamp housing for good luck, or you offer a silent, wordless prayer to whatever benevolent spirits might watch over lonely mariners and even lonelier lighthouse keepers. Or maybe there's a particular flock of shearwaters or petrels, those tireless wanderers of the Southern Ocean that almost always makes a final swift low pass by your lantern room at this exact moment of lighting their dark wings, silhouetted for an instant against the last light of the sky, a reliable natural clock signaling that your nightly vigil has truly begun. The lamp is lit, its beam is steady, powerful, rotating with its familiar, comforting rhythm. Your most critical nightly duty is accomplished. The great eye of the lighthouse is open once more, watching over the dark waters, a steadfast, unwavering promise of guidance and warning. You stand for a moment bathed in its brilliant, pulsating light, feeling the gentle warmth it radiates, and prepare yourself for the long, quiet, and often profoundly lonely hours of the night watch that lie ahead, keeping that vital beacon burning bright until the next distant, uncertain dawn. The great lamp burns steadily above you, its brilliant heart of fire and meticulously crafted optics, transforming simple kerosene or oil into a powerful sweeping beam of salvation that slices through the profound oceanic darkness. It is midnight or thereabouts. The exact hour is of little consequence in this timeless, isolated domain, marked only by the slow turning of the constellations, when the clouds permit a view and the aching weariness in your bones. You are high in the lantern room, the glass-walled crown of your stone tower, keeping your solitary vigil through the deepest, stillest, and often most challenging hours of the long night. Your job professional night owl, guardian of the coast, and operator of what often feels like the world's largest, most important, and decidedly least entertaining disco ball sea storm, an existential dread edition. The circular room is filled with a surprising warmth, a dry, radiant heat emanating from the massive lamp mechanism itself. The air hums with its operation, the soft, rhythmic hiss of the burner, the gentle, almost imperceptible whir or click of the clockwork machinery that ensures its constant, precise rotation. This intricate assembly of polished brass, gleaming crystal, and precisely adjusted wicks or mantles is your charge, your responsibility, your entire world during these dark hours. You pace the small, circular, iron-grated floor, your footsteps soft so as not to disturb the delicate balance of the apparatus, your gaze constantly flicking between the steady burn of the flame within its protective chimney and the vast, impenetrable blackness outside the thick, curved glass panes. With each slow, majestic sweep of the beam, a segment of the tumultuous, unseen sea below is momentarily brilliantly illuminated. You might catch a fleeting glimpse of a colossal white-crested wave, frozen for an instant in the act of curling and crashing against the unseen cliffs, or a patch of churning, foam-flecked water, or simply the endless, featureless expanse of the dark, heaving ocean. Then, just as quickly, that small patch of illuminated chaos is plunged back into darkness as the beam moves on relentless, methodical indifferent. It's a hypnotic, almost disorienting spectacle. This constant rhythmic painting and erasing of a tiny fragment of a vast, wild world. The lighthouse's nightly mantra you often think could be rotate, illuminate, try very hard not to fall asleep, and inadvertently allow a three-masted bark laden with important government officials and a large quantity of annoyingly expensive porcelain to impale itself upon that very obvious, very large, and extremely pointy giant rock just offshore. Your duties during this watch are deceptively simple, yet demand unwavering vigilance. You must ensure the lamp continues to burn at its optimal intensity without smoking or faltering. You check the fuel levels, monitor the wicks for any charring or unevenness, listen for any change in the rhythm of the rotation mechanism that might indicate a problem. You keep the logbook, a heavy leather-bound volume provided by the Lighthouse service, meticulously updated, noting the time as best you can estimate it, the weather conditions, wind direction, and strength, state of the sea visibility, and any sightings, though sightings of anything other than more darkness and more waves are vanishingly rare. Lighthouse keepers operated on strict watch schedules, often involving long solitary stints, particularly in remote single keeper stations like this one. The logbook was not just a record, it was a testament to duty, performed a silent witness to your lonely vigil. The specific shift patterns and the typical duration of continuous solitary watchkeeping duties expected of lighthouse keepers, particularly comparing the more formally structured multi-keeper stations that were becoming common in some regions, versus these incredibly isolated single keeper outposts that still existed in places like colonial Australia during the 19th century, and the consequent, almost inevitable, cumulative impact of such demanding schedules on sleep deprivation reaction times, overall psychological well-being, and even basic sanity are often keenly debated by maritime historians and researchers. They scrutinize varying official colonial regulations, surviving lighthouse logbook entries, with their often terse and understated accounts of hardship, and any poignant personal testimonies that have come to light for clues to the true lived experience. You are currently living that experience, and it mostly involves a lot of coffee, if you had any left, which you don't, and a profound bone-deep desire for your relief, who is of course also you just several hours in the future. The solitude is immense palpable. High in this glass cage, suspended between the wild dark sea and the even wilder darker sky, you are utterly comprehensively alone. The sounds are your only companions, the ceaseless elemental roar of the wind as it buffets the lantern, housing making the thick glass panes hum and vibrate, the distant muffled thunder of the waves crashing against the cliffs far below, a sound that seems to shake the very foundations of the tower, the steady rhythmic tick and whir of the lamp's own heart. Sometimes on a clearer night, if you press your ear to the cool glass, you can almost hear the stars, a faint, crystalline, impossibly distant music. Or perhaps that's just the ringing in your ears from lack of sleep and an overabundance of wind. You fight against the insidious creep of drowsiness. Your eyelids are heavy gritty. Your body aches with a dull, persistent weariness. The warmth from the lamp, which was initially comforting, now conspires with the hypnotic rhythm of the rotating beam and the monotonous sounds of the night to lull you towards unconsciousness. You might pace the small confines of the lantern room, from one curved window to another, the iron grating of the floor, cold beneath your boots. You might rub your tired eyes, splash a little cool water on your face from a small ewer you keep for just such emergencies, or even pinch yourself sharply to jolt your senses back to alertness. You are not just tired, you are been awake since before the invention of sensible bedtimes, and am currently powered by sheer stubbornness and the faint, lingering aroma of yesterday's porridge tired. Occasionally a large moth or a bewildered nightbird, drawn by the irresistible allure of the brilliant light, will dash itself against the thick glass panes with a soft, startling thud, a tiny tragic casualty of your life-saving beacon. You watch its stunned or lifeless form slide down the glass and disappear into the darkness below, a small, poignant reminder of the other lives that exist out there in the vast, unseeing night, sometimes on particularly clear, calm nights. If the sea is still, you've noticed that certain types of small, phosphorescent marine organisms are stirred up by the currents or the passage of larger creatures, and they create faint, ghostly greenish glows in the breaking waves as they are momentarily illuminated by your lamp's sweeping beam, a fleeting, beautiful, and slightly eerie spectacle. The deep solitude, the rhythmic monotony of the light and sound, the profound darkness beyond your small, warm circle of illumination, and your own extreme fatigue begin to work their subtle magic on your perceptions. The familiar sounds of the tower, the wind, the sea, start to take on strange new cadences, new meanings. The very silence between the gusts of wind seems to stretch to become heavy with unspoken things. Your mind starved for any meaningful stimulus, but far too tired for coherent, rational thought, starts to become a fertile ground for, well, for whispers. The rhythmic sweep of the great lamp's beam continues its unwavering patrol of the tumultuous, inky sea, each rotation a slow, deliberate tick of the long night's unforgiving clock. You stand or perhaps sit slumped in your worn wooden chair, within the glass-walled lantern room, a solitary sentinel, high above the raging elements. The warmth from the lamp itself is a small, localized comfort, but beyond its immediate embrace, the chill of the deep night, carried on the ever-present sighing wind, seeps through the thick stone walls, through the very glass of the lantern. Hours of vigilance, of profound isolation, of staring into the vast, featureless darkness have begun to take their toll not just on your weary body, but on your equally weary mind. Your brain bored with the usual limited programming of wind sounds, wave sounds, and the occasional creak of ancient stonework, has apparently decided to produce its own, rather more unsettling, low-budget supernatural thriller using the available auditory and visual phenomena as its unwilling cast. It often begins subtly. A particular gust of wind as it howls around a projecting cornice or through a tiny unseen fissure in the lantern's copper dome might momentarily take on a quality that sounds less like moving air and more like a drawn-out mournful sigh or a whisper. You tell yourself it is just the wind, of course. The wind in a place like this, a solitary tower perched on the very edge of a vast empty continent, battered by the unobstructed fury of the Southern Ocean, can play 1,000 strange and deceptive tricks on the ear. Yet the sound lingers in your memory, a faint, unsettling question mark. Then perhaps the very structure of the tower around you, which normally groans and creaks under the pressure of a gale, with a certain familiar, almost companionable rhythm, will produce a new sound. A sharper crack, a sudden unfamiliar shudder, a sound that your tired mind, ever eager for some form of stimulus, however unwelcome, immediately interprets as a stealthy footstep on the winding stone stairs below, or the creak of a seldom used door being slowly, cautiously opened. Your heart gives a small, tired jump. You strain your ears, listening intently over the roar of the storm, every nerve ending suddenly unpleasantly alive. But there is nothing. Only the wind, the waves, and the steady mechanical whir of the lamp's rotation mechanism. It was nothing. Just the old tower settling. Just your imagination fueled by solitude and too many hours of darkness. Or was it the degree to which what was sometimes anecdotally termed lighthouse madness or keeper's syndrome was a clinically definable and formally recognized psychiatric condition in the 19th century, versus a more generalized, often sensationalized collection of anecdotal accounts describing various stress induced psychological disturbances, periods of profound melancholy, or the development of marked eccentric behaviors exacerbated by conditions of extreme prolonged isolation and sensory monotony in an era before modern psychiatry and a more nuanced understanding of mental health and its environmental triggers remains a subject of considerable historical medical debate and ongoing re-examination by scholars. You, however, are not currently concerned with scholarly definitions. You're merely concerned with the rather unsettling possibility that the wind has just called your name, or that the shadows in the corner of the lantern room are looking decidedly more substantial and possibly more judgmental than they did an hour ago. You rub your tired eyes, trying to dispel the phantoms. The powerful beam of the lamp, as it sweeps across the storm-tossed sea, momentarily illuminates the crest of a colossal wave, freezing its white churning fury for an instant before plunging it back into blackness. And in that brief, brilliant flash, did you see something else? A shape, a form. The dark, jagged outline of a spar of wreckage, perhaps, or something. Longer, darker, more sinuous, disappearing beneath the foam. Or was it just the way the light caught the spray? The way the shadows danced on the heaving water? You tell yourself it was nothing. It is always nothing. Mostly. There is a particular legend associated with this very headland, a story told in hushed tones by the oldest fisherman in the nearest distant port, a tale of a phantom ship, a ghostly, full-rigged vessel with tattered sails and a crew of spectral mariners that is said to appear only during the fiercest storms, forever trying to round the cape forever, failing its silent, sorrowful passage, a harbinger of further ill fortune for any who might witness it. It's just a story, of course. A foolish, superstitious tale to frighten children and unseasoned sailors. Yet as you stare out into the howling blackness, the rain lashing against the glass, the tower shuddering beneath you, the story has a way of sidling uncomfortably close, its ghostly presence almost as tangible as the cold draft seeping in around the lantern room door. You might try to distract yourself to ground your thoughts in the mundane, the practical. You check the lamp's flame again, ensuring it burns bright and true. You note the time in your logbook, or at least make a mental estimation of it. The entry is stark and unadorned as your surroundings. Midnight. Storm continues with unabated fury. Wind force 10 from southwest. Sea very high. Lamp burning well. You might even resort to a technique some keepers use to combat the disorienting effects of solitude and monotony. You begin to sing your voice a rough, uncertain baritone, barely audible above the roar of the tempest. A repertoire of old sea shanties, half-forgotten childhood hymns, or perhaps just a tuneless, repetitive humming. It's not exactly a concert hall performance, but it's a human sound, a small assertion of your own presence against the overwhelming elemental chaos. You're pretty sure the official lighthouse keeper's sanity manual, if such a comforting document actually existed, would probably have a single heavily underlined page simply saying, "Try very hard not to talk to the seagulls," or the lamp, especially under any circumstances if they start talking back to you. But even as you sing, your ears are straining, listening for those other sounds, those whispers on the wind, those creaks that might be more than just the tower settling. Your eyes, despite your best efforts, keep flicking to the darkest corners, to the places where the shadows seem to deepen and coalesce into unsettling, almost sentient forms. The isolation is a palpable thing now, a heavy cloak, woven of darkness storm, and the strange, disquieting tricks of a tired, overwrought mind. You are a single tiny spark of consciousness in a vast, unseeing, unhearing, and uncaring universe, and the universe, it seems, is occasionally in the mood to whisper back. Then a sound again, closer this time. A soft, scraping, almost furtive noise, seemingly from just outside the lantern glass on the narrow walkway. Your song dies in your throat. You freeze every sense screaming. It couldn't be a bird, not in this. Not a branch. There are no trees this high. You tell yourself it's a loose piece of rigging, a rope end, lashing in the wind. But it sounds too deliberate. You strain your eyes, peering through the rain-lashed glass, your heart hammering against your ribs. For a moment, you see nothing but the driving sleet and the blackness. Then another gust of wind, a momentary shift in the shadows, and you think just for a terrifying, heart-stopping instant, you see a dark shape, a fleeting silhouette. But no, it's gone. Just the storm. Just the night. Just your mind teetering on the very brink of exhaustion, playing its cruel, elaborate games. You let out a shaky breath, trying to dismiss it, trying to regain some semblance of composure, and turn your gaze resolutely back out to the chaotic empty sea. You rub your eyes, still trying to shake the lingering unease from that last unsettling figment of your overtired imagination. That furtive scraping sound, that fleeting dark silhouette just beyond the lantern glass. It was nothing, you tell yourself again, with a firmness that doesn't quite reach the deeper, colder corners of your mind. Just the storm playing its usual malicious tricks. Just the wind, that eternal, many-voiced trickster. You force your gaze back out into the tumultuous, rain-lashed, wind-scoured blackness. Your primary duty still to watch, to observe, to ensure your own great lamp continues its steady life-saving sweep through the maelstrom. The tower shudders again as another colossal wave slams into its base, a deep, resonant boom that you feel as much in your chest as you hear with your ears. And then in a brief, almost imperceptible lull in the driving rain, through a momentary thinning of the squall line that passes like a ragged, ghostly curtain, you see it. Or rather, you see a hint of it. Not a phantom this time, not a trick of the shadows or a creation of your weary brain. This is different. This has a quality of persistence, of otherness, far out on the heaving, invisible horizon, in a direction you know to be open sea, a tiny, almost infinitesimal spark of light flickers, vanishes, then flickers again. It is impossibly small, incredibly distant, like a lost star that has somehow fallen from the heavens and is now struggling to stay afloat in the angry black ocean. Your heart, which had been thumping with a dull, exhausted rhythm, gives a sudden sharp jolt, a surge of adrenaline that momentarily clears the fog from your mind. You lunge for the old brass telescope, kept always ready on its bracket near the window, its lens perpetually needing a wipe from the salt spray. You fumble with it, your cold, stiff fingers clumsy on the focusing ring, and try to bring that distant, elusive spark into view. The telescope magnifies not only the light, but also the terrifying chaotic movement of the storm-tossed sea between you and it, making it almost impossible to hold a steady bead. The little light dances and disappears behind mountainous black waves, then reappears a tiny, defiant pinprick against the overwhelming darkness. Well, look at that. Actual, non imaginary, three-dimensional other people, or at least a very convincing, if somewhat waterlogged, boat shaped blob that presumably contains them. After several minutes of strained, squinting observation as your own lamp's beam sweeps past that sector of the ocean, you catch a more defined glimpse. It is indeed a vessel, a sailing ship, by the look of its tall, raked masts, though any canvas it might have once carried is likely long since shredded or tightly furled against the storm's fury. It is laboring heavily, pitching and rolling in the immense seas, sometimes disappearing entirely into the troughs of the waves, only to reappear moments later, clinging precariously to the crest of the next liquid mountain. The light you saw is a single bravely burning lamp, perhaps a masthead light or a stern lantern, incredibly small and fragile against the immensity of the storm and the ocean. You briefly consider sending them a telepathic message along the lines of, "Greetings, fellow sufferers. Rather a brisk evening for a leisurely sail, isn't it?" Especially if one particularly enjoys existential terror and the constant imminent threat of being swallowed whole by a malevolent ocean. The waters off this particular stretch of the southern Australian coast in the 19th century were notoriously treacherous, a graveyard for many an unwary or unlucky vessel. Clipper ships on their record-breaking voyages from England to the goldfields of Victoria or the ports of Sydney often ran far south to catch the strong westerly winds of the roaring 40s, but in doing so they risked encountering these ferocious Southern Ocean storms and the unlit, poorly charted hazards of this wild coastline. Whaling ships, too, plied these waters, as did smaller coastal traders, moving goods between the scattered colonial settlements. Your lighthouse and others like it were slowly, painstakingly being built as vital sentinels, essential for the safety of this burgeoning maritime trade and the very lives of those who sailed these seas. The sight of this ship battling for its life out there in the storm is a stark, visceral reminder of the profound importance of your own lonely vigil of the steady, unwavering beam that cuts through this chaos. The reliability and precise interpretation of visual sightings of distant, often barely discernible vessels from isolated lighthouses during periods of severe storms, heavy obscuring seas, or extremely low visibility in the 19th century, has sometimes meticulously, or perhaps given the conditions, rather hastily and with a degree of hopeful uncertainty, recorded in keepers' official logbooks, and the inherent considerable challenges of distinguishing between actual struggling ships and various weather-induced optical illusions, phantom lights, or even the understandable products of wishful thinking on the part of profoundly isolated and often sleep-deprived observers, is a topic that maritime historians and researchers who delve into such records sometimes ponder with a degree of academic caution. But this, you are certain, is no illusion. This is real. Your first instinct, your ingrained duty, is to check your own lamp. Is it burning at its brightest? Is the rotation smooth and uninterrupted? You quickly scan the mechanism. Reassure yourself that all is as it should be, that your light is sending out its strongest, clearest signal. There might be a specific rudimentary signal system your lighthouse is equipped with, perhaps a flare or a signal rocket to be fired if you observe a ship in obvious immediate distress and close enough to potentially benefit. Though such measures were rare for very remote stations and of dubious utility in a storm of this magnitude. This vessel, however, though clearly in peril, is still some leagues distant and appears to be for now at least navigating under its own power, however erratically. Your primary role is to be seen to provide that fixed point of reference, that warning of the dangerous coast it is hopefully trying to avoid. You watch its slow, agonizing progress. For what seems like an age, your own discomforts, the cold, the damp, the hunger, the fatigue, momentarily forgotten in the face of this unfolding drama. The ship is a tiny, fragile toy in the grip of immense elemental forces. Sometimes it is clearly visible in a flash of lightning that momentarily illuminates the entire raging seascape, its masts stark against the bruised purple of the storm clouds. Other times it is just that single brave bobbing light, a tiny spark of human defiance against the overwhelming power of nature. You find yourself sending silent, fervent wishes for its safety, a strange sense of camaraderie, of shared humanity, reaching out across the storm-tossed miles to those unknown souls on that unseen deck. Then, as slowly and as erratically as it appeared, the ship begins to fade. It is either drawing further away, or another even denser band of rain and spray is moving in, obscuring it from your view. The little light flickers one last time, a tiny desperate wink, and then it is gone, swallowed once more by the howling blackness and the raging sea, and it's gone. Back to your regularly scheduled programming of Waves and Wind, the endless, slightly terrifying remix. The ocean before you is once again a vast, empty, chaotic void. The brief, intense connection to the outside world, to other human lives, is severed. A strange mixture of emotions washes over you, relief that the ship seems to have passed, or at least disappeared from your immediate concern. A renewed, almost sharper sense of your own profound isolation now that its fleeting presence has been withdrawn, and a deep, abiding weariness. The storm still rages, though perhaps, just perhaps, as the deepest hours of the night begin to yield to the almost imperceptible promise of a distant, still unseen dawn. Its fury is starting to show the very first, faintest signs of abating. Your watch, however, continues. The storm, which raged like 1,000 tormented demons for what felt like an eternity, finally begins to lose its maniacal fury. The wind, though still a powerful, mournful presence, no longer shrieks with that same desperate glass-rattling intensity. It subsides into a series of long, drawn-out, weary sighs, as if exhausted by its own protracted tantrum. The rain, which had been a torrential, blinding deluge, lessens to a sporadic, almost apologetic drizzle, then finally ceases altogether, leaving behind a world that is scoured, dripping, and profoundly, deeply weary. You stand in the lantern room equally weary, your body aching from the constant tension of the night, your ears still ringing with the phantom roar of the tempest. The great lamp, your steadfast companion through the chaos, has burned true, its beam unwavering, a testament to your own quiet, dogged vigilance. And then through the salt-streaked, water-beaded glass of the lantern you see it. The same slow, reluctant, almost grudging arrival of dawn that you have witnessed countless times before, yet one that always feels both utterly familiar and strangely new after a night of such elemental violence. The eastern sky, where the storm clouds are beginning to break and shred into ragged, bruised looking remnants, bleeds from a deep, bruised purple into a cold, watery gray. There are no glorious hues of rose and saffron this morning, no cheerful golden trumpets heralding the sun's arrival. This is a dawn stripped bare, a pale, exhausted ghost of a morning, reflecting the exhaustion that permeates your very bones. Congratulations, you've successfully survived another night of extreme weather karaoke with the wind and waves, featuring a special guest appearance by Existential Dread. Your prize another stunningly identical day. You watch as the weak gray light slowly, painstakingly reveals the aftermath of the storm. The sea below is still a vast, heaving, turbulent expanse of dirty green and slate gray water, though the mountainous waves have subsided into a more chaotic, choppy restlessness. White foam streaks its surface like angry scars. Closer to shore, you can see where the waves have gouged at the cliffs, perhaps dislodging a fresh scar of raw earth or a tumble of loose rocks. The small, desolate beach at the foot of your headland, if you have one, will be littered with a fresh harvest of storm wrack, tangled kelp, shattered driftwood, perhaps even the sad, broken remnants of some unfortunate seabird that did not survive the night. After a particularly vicious storm like this one, you sometimes find strange foreign timbers, washed ashore pieces of ships from unknown ports, their wood dark and heavy, a somber reminder of the ocean's vast connecting and often fatal pathways. The lamp its duty for this night, almost done, still casts its steady, now somewhat superfluous beam out into the growing daylight. It is time for its rest and for yours. You go through the familiar meticulous ritual of extinguishing the light, the same sequence of actions you performed what feels like a lifetime ago at the dawn of the previous pre-storm day. You turn down the wicks or adjust the fuel flow, watching as the brilliant flame within the great Fresnel lens diminishes, shrinks, and finally, with a soft, almost imperceptible sigh from the cooling metal, winks out. The sudden absence of its powerful radiant light, even in the growing gray illumination of the morning, makes the lantern room feel instantly colder, emptier, its intricate glass eye now dark and dormant once more. You complete your final logbook entry. For the night watch, your hands stiff and clumsy, your handwriting perhaps a little shakier than usual. Storm abated towards dawn. Wind easing to force 6 SE. Sea remains very rough. Lamp extinguished at first light. All well with light. All well with light. The standard understated phrase that encompasses so much. The hours of terror, the bone-jarring vibrations of the tower, the constant fear that the lamp might fail, that your small man-made beacon might be swallowed by the overwhelming power of the storm. The psychological coping mechanisms, both conscious and unconscious, developed by individuals like yourself, who endure such extreme and prolonged long-term isolation, sensory bombardment, alternating with profound monotony and the ever-present weight of immense responsibility, and the often fine, almost imperceptible line between resilient, functional adaptation to such an incredibly demanding environment and the potential gradual onset of more serious mental and emotional decline, or what was sometimes dismissed as mere cabin fever or keeper's eccentricity, are subjects that continue to fascinate and challenge historians of psychology, maritime sociology, and the very limits of human endurance. With the lamp out and the logbook entry complete, your official duties for the night are finally truly over. A wave of exhaustion so profound it makes your knees buckle washes over you. Every muscle in your body aches with a deep, resonant weariness. Your eyes are gritty and burning from lack of sleep and the constant sting of salt and wind. You feel hollowed out, scoured, as if the storm has taken a part of you with it. You make your slow, creaking way down the winding stone stairs. For the last time this watch, each step an effort, each landing a small temporary victory against the crushing weight of your fatigue. You reach your small, cold living quarters. The air here is still damp and smells faintly of old kerosene and your own unwashed humanity. There is no welcoming warmth, no comforting presence, only the promise of your narrow, unyielding bunk and a few hours of what will likely be a heavy, dreamless, and entirely unrefreshing stupor that passes for sleep in your world. You might not even bother to remove your oilskins or your sea boots, simply collapsing onto the rough woolen blanket in a state of near total systemic shutdown. The job perks, as you often reflect in your more lucid moments, include stunning, if usually rather gray, ocean views, unparalleled, almost aggressive solitude, and the exciting ongoing opportunity to become intimately acquainted with the various stages of your own slowly unraveling sanity. The light outside the small salt-caked window is now a flat, unforgiving gray. The sounds of the subsiding storm, the roar of the sea, the moan of the wind are still there, but they are muffled now, distant, as if coming from another world. Your world has shrunk to the small, cold room, to the rough texture of your blanket, to the overwhelming, irresistible pull of oblivion. The repetitive cycle of your lonely existence. Light the lamp, watch. The sea, extinguish. The lamp, clean the lens, watch. The sea, light the lamp, is about to begin anew, but for these few precious stolen hours, you are released. You close your eyes, and the darkness that enfolds you is a welcome, if temporary, friend. The lighthouse keeper's eternal motto, you sometimes think, should be rinse with salt spray, lather with lamp oil, repeat, forever, or until the supply ship finally remembers you exist. And so, as the gray, weary light of another coastal dawn seeps into your small, stone-walled chamber, you surrender at last to the profound, bone-deep exhaustion that has been your constant companion through the long, dark, and tumultuous night. The roar of the now subsiding storm, the mournful cry of the wind, the rhythmic crash of waves against the unyielding cliffs, all these powerful elemental sounds begin to soften, to recede, to merge into a distant, undifferentiated drone, like the fading echo of a half-forgotten dream. Feel the immense tension in your shoulders and your back, in your very soul, begin to uncoil, to release its tenacious grip. Your breathing, which was perhaps shallow and anxious during the height of the tempest, now deepens, slows, finding a rhythm of profound, restorative peace. The world outside, with its endless, restless ocean and its vast, indifferent sky, can wait. For now there is only this small, sheltered space, this narrow bunk, this blessed, all-encompassing darkness behind your closed eyelids. Allow yourself to sink, to drift, to be carried away on the gentle, silent tide of a sleep so deep It touches the very foundations of your being. The lamp is out. The storm has passed. Your watch is over. Rest now, lonely keeper. Rest.